The man's knees hit the marble before anyone in the ballroom understood what had happened. One moment, Evelyn Golden was standing at the edge of the Black Orchid Charity Gala, deep purple velvet, natural curls catching the chandelier light, the kind of beautiful that makes men careless. The next, the assassin sent to kill her husband was crumpling against her grip, his wrist locked, his body folding downward with the slow inevitability of a building coming down. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't break a sweat. She held him there, one hand, no effort, while 300 members of Seoul's most dangerous criminal society stood absolutely still and tried to remember how to breathe. Across the ballroom, Baek Si-on, head of the Baek Syndicate, the man they called untouchable, the man who had spent 2 years believing his American wife was decorative, stood with a glass of whiskey arrested halfway to his lips. The thigh holster visible through the slit of her gown caught the light as she shifted her weight. His eyes found it, then found her face, then found the cold, composed certainty in her expression, the look of a woman for whom this was not a crisis, but a Tuesday. He had been preparing to end their marriage. He was no longer thinking about that. For 2 years, his counsel called her his liability. Tonight, Seoul learned what Evelyn S. Golden actually was, and nobody in that room would ever make the same mistake again. Before Evelyn takes another step, I want to take one myself, toward you. Thank you for pressing play, for staying past the first few seconds, for giving this story a chance. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. I genuinely want to know.
2 years ago, Evelyn S. Golden had agreed to the arrangement in a lawyer's office that smelled of stale coffee and expediency. 40 minutes, 2 signatures, a handshake between her contact and a man in a charcoal suit who didn't smile, didn't explain himself, and looked at her the way people look at weather, something to be accounted for, not engaged with. She had told herself that was fine. She hadn't come to Seoul looking for warmth. She had come to disappear, and Baek Si-on's name was the best cover a burned CIA operative with 3 dead aliases could buy. What the arrangement gave her was simple. His protection, his name, his penthouse on the 41st floor of a building that Seoul's criminal world treated as neutral ground. What it asked of her was simpler still. Presence without participation. Attend the events, wear the clothes, smile at the right moments, and say nothing of consequence. Be the foreign wife, the decorative American, the soft, pleasant liability they could dismiss without effort. She was extraordinarily good at being underestimated.
What the arrangement did not account for, what neither of them had anticipated, was the penthouse itself. 41 floors of shared silence have a way of teaching you things about a person. She learned Si-on the way she had always gathered intelligence, patiently, precisely, without being caught looking. She learned that he arrived home at 11:47 most nights, jacket already loosened before he cleared the elevator, that he kept exactly 3 photographs in his private study, all of the same man, his father, who had been shot in a parking structure 17 years ago and had left behind a syndicate and a 14-year-old boy who learned fast that love was an entry point for enemies. That he ran the Baek organization through information and discipline rather than fear, which his counsel resented and his rivals underestimated. And that he had not, in 2 years of shared space, once let her see past the architecture of his composure. She understood that completely. She had her own architecture. What she had not planned for was falling in love with him across the distance of it. She found the divorce papers on a Tuesday, second drawer, beneath a copy of the week's financial reports, unsigned but drafted in clean, formal language that left no ambiguity. She had stood in his study for a long time, not moving, until the city lights below had blurred at the edges and sharpened again. Then she had gone back to her wing of the penthouse and begun, very quietly, to pack. That was 2 weeks ago. She had 3 days left, 3 days before she vanished again, back into the formless space between identities where women like her went when they stopped being useful. She did not let herself think about how much she did not want to go. What she did not know, what she had been too careful, too contained, too thoroughly trained to consider, was that Baek Si-on had been learning her too, and that somewhere in his second drawer, beneath those unsigned papers, he had known her real name for 3 months and said nothing. The gala was in 4 hours. Neither of them would be the same person by the time it ended.
Choi Jae-hyun had never won anything by force. That was, in fact, the thing that made him dangerous. He was patient in the way that water is patient, willing to find every crack, apply pressure at every weak point, and wait as long as necessary for the structure to fail on its own. He had spent 11 years building his organization not through violence, but through information, and he understood better than most that the fastest way to destroy a man was not to attack him directly. It was to make the people around him stop believing in him first. He had been working on Baek Si-on's council for 6 months. The whisper campaign against Evelyn had been almost elegant in its simplicity. A word here, a suggestion there, a carefully timed question dropped into the right ears at the right moments. The American doesn't understand our world. She's a liability he can't see clearly because she's too close. A man distracted by a woman is a man who makes mistakes. The council, already uneasy with Si-on's methodical modernization of the syndicate, had been receptive soil. The divorce papers had been their idea. Si-on signing them had only been a matter of time. The assassin at the Black Orchid Gala was never meant to succeed. He was a pressure test, a way to measure how Si-on responded under public threat, how quickly his people moved, where the gaps were. Choi's envoy was positioned to observe and report back. Neither of them accounted for Evelyn. The ballroom had gone silent so completely that the sound of the assassin's body meeting the marble floor carried all the way to the far wall. 300 people held perfectly still as Evelyn straightened, adjusted the shoulder of her gown, and turned to find Choi's envoy already reaching for her arm, the instinctive grab of a man who had never once considered that she might be the most dangerous person in the room. She said 4 words to him in Korean, so precise it stopped his breath. Then she put him on his knees and held him there until the silence became something else entirely. Not shock, but reckoning. Across the room, Si-on set down his glass with quiet, controlled deliberateness and found his lieutenant Do-yeon at his shoulder within seconds. "Find out everything," he said, his voice low and absolutely level. "About Choi's move tonight." A pause, brief and weighted. "And about my wife." They didn't speak in the car. 41 floors of elevator silence followed. It was only when the penthouse lights came up low over the city skyline, Seoul sprawling below them like something that didn't know yet what had happened tonight, that Si-on turned from the window and said simply, "Tell me." So she did. 7 years in the field. 4 countries, 11 cover identities, the particular loneliness of a life built from borrowed names. She'd been good at the work. Exceptional, her assessment said, in the flat bureaucratic language that passed for praise. And she had believed, the way young operatives believe, that the institution she served would hold, that competence was protection, that loyalty ran both directions. Her handler had sold her access codes to a Chinese intelligence contractor for $400,000. By the time she understood what had happened, 2 of her sources were dead and her name was burned across 3 allied intelligence networks. The disavowal came in a single encrypted message. No explanation. No extraction, no country. A contact she had once pulled out of a collapsed building in Beirut had arranged the marriage to Si-on as the only exit that didn't require her to disappear permanently. She had taken it. She had arrived in Seoul with 1 bag and no illusions and told herself that survival was enough. She did not tell him about the part where she had stopped believing that somewhere around month 4. When she finished, the city lights held the silence between them for a long moment. Then Si-on said, quietly,
I found your real file 3 months ago. Evelyn went still. The CIA classification, your handler's name, what he did. He didn't look away from her. All of it. You said nothing. It wasn't an accusation, it was the sound of something she had built very carefully beginning to shift. No. Then why the divorce papers? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it, stripped of the careful control he wore like a second suit. Because I didn't know what to do with how much I wanted you to stay. The city glittered 41 floors below them. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. She had asked for 1 hour. She used 40 minutes. The Baek Syndicate's private strategy room was built for men who trusted nothing on paper, and Evelyn had spent the previous night converting 2 years of careful, compartmentalized documentation into a briefing that left no room for doubt. Financial mapping across 4 shell corporations, weapons contract trails through 3 intermediaries that dissolved on paper but cohered when you followed the money far enough. Communication intercepts she had flagged, dated, and cross-referenced against Choi's known operational calendar. 11 months of surveillance photographs, each one time-stamped, each one annotated in precise, unhurried Korean. She spread it across the table without ceremony and stepped back. Park Do-yeon, Si-on's lieutenant, a decade of loyalty in the set of his jaw, looked at the documents the way he looked at everything, with the professional neutrality of a man who had learned that first impressions were liabilities. He had said nothing since she entered the room. His skepticism didn't require words. It was architectural. He reached for the primary folder. Choi has 2 active moles inside this organization, Evelyn said, before his hand closed on it. Nam Chel-soo, procurement. He's been feeding shipment schedules every 10 days for 4 months. And Baek Hyun-woo, your Eastern Territory coordinator. His has been running longer, 11 months. She paused. He was at the gala last night, 3rd table from the east wall. Do-yeon's hand stopped. The silence in the room reorganized itself. Si-on, standing at the window with his arms crossed, didn't move, but something in his stillness changed quality, became less contained, more focused, the way a current changes when the channel narrows. Do-yeon opened the folder, read, turned 3 pages, closed it. He looked at Evelyn for a long moment with the expression of a man recalculating something he thought he had already solved. Then he looked at Si-on. She's been protecting this organization, he said. It wasn't quite a question. For 2 years, Si-on answered quietly, without being asked. Do-yeon turned back to the table, and when he spoke again, the skepticism was entirely gone, replaced by something rarer from him, a tension that had decided to become respect. The Grand Lantern Ceremony. 12 days. 11, Evelyn corrected, already reaching for the next document. We start tonight. To Choi's moles, she was exactly what she had always been. Decorative, pleasant, and entirely unthreatening. She wore soft colors to the gallery openings. She laughed at the right moments over afternoon tea, asked surface questions, and let her Korean slip, occasionally, convincingly, into the careful approximation of someone still learning. She moved through Choi's surveillance network like a woman who didn't know it was there, and fed it, with meticulous precision, everything she needed it to believe. Si-on was distracted. The syndicate was fractured. The lantern ceremony would find them unprepared. Every word of it was constructed. Every smile was operational. What was not operational, what had no place in any brief she had ever written, was what was happening in the penthouse at 6 a.m., when the strategy sessions ran long, and the city outside was still dark, and Si-on came into the kitchen to find her already there, 2 cups of coffee on the counter, one at his preferred temperature without him having said a word. He looked at the cup for a moment before he picked it up. He didn't ask how she knew. She didn't explain. But something in the space between them shifted, very slightly, in the way that things shift when 2 people stop pretending they haven't been paying attention. She learned that he thought standing up, pacing the length of the room when a problem had no clean solution, that he kept a worn paperback in his jacket pocket, poetry, classical Korean, the pages soft with rereading, and never mentioned it to anyone. That he watched her work with an expression she had initially classified as assessment and was increasingly unable to classify as anything so simple. He was understanding, she realized, the scale of it. 2 years of protection built in silence, offered without contract or acknowledgement, maintained with no guarantee that he would ever choose to keep her. He was doing the arithmetic of it and arriving somewhere that made his jaw tighten and his eyes stay on her a beat longer than strictly necessary. The world outside was tightening. Choi's network was receiving its false intelligence cleanly, swallowing it whole. And in the quiet of 11 days of shared early mornings and operational proximity, the distance that had lived between them for 2 years was running out of room. She had clocked Choi's surveillance on the social club 3 days before the lunch. She had said nothing to Soo-yeon, because Soo-yeon was Si-on's younger sister and not an operative, and the kindest thing Evelyn could do for her was make sure the afternoon felt entirely ordinary right up until it wasn't. It stopped being ordinary when the lights went out. 6 men. Tactical formation, which told her Choi was done with subtlety. The first came fast and lost consciousness faster. The second and third came together, a coordination she respected briefly before she dismantled it. By the time the fourth reached her, she had already redirected his momentum into the fifth, and the geometry of the room did the rest. 63 seconds from darkness to silence, and when the emergency lighting clicked on, Soo-yeon was pressed against the far wall with both hands over her mouth, and Evelyn was standing in the center of 6 incapacitated men with a deep cut along her collarbone where the fourth one's blade had found the one angle she hadn't fully covered. She pressed her hand to it, assessed, and decided it could wait. "Don't look at them," she told Soo-yeon, in the same tone she might use to discuss the lunch menu. "Look at me. Are you hurt?" Soo-yeon shook her head. She was looking at Evelyn the way people look at things they will spend years trying to accurately describe. Si-on arrived 8 minutes later. He took in the room in a single sweep. 6 men, his sister shaken but unharmed, his wife standing with blood darkening the shoulder of her dress, and crossed to Evelyn without a word. He moved the hand she had pressed to the wound with a gentleness that seemed to cost him something, examined it, and when he reached for the cloth Do-yeon produced, his hands were not steady. She noticed. She didn't say anything. He closed the wound with the focused, careful silence of a man keeping himself together through concentration alone. When he finished, he didn't step back. He stayed close, one hand still at her collarbone, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried no performance in it whatsoever. "I am not losing you." Flat. Absolute. A decision already made. Not to Choi. Not to any of this. Evelyn was tired and bleeding and had run out of distance to hide behind. "Then stop trying to," she said quietly, and meant every word. She didn't know what woke her. She only knew that at 4 a.m. she was sitting on the rooftop of the building with her knees drawn up and the Seoul skyline doing what city skylines do in the hours before dawn, holding its breath, glittering quietly, indifferent to the people falling apart beneath it. She had not packed. She had not been able to make herself do it. That terrified her more than anything that had happened in the social club. She catalogued what she knew about trust, the way she had been trained to catalog threats, systematically, without sentiment. Her handler had trusted her completely and sold her for money without losing a night's sleep. The agency had trusted her record and disavowed her without a forwarding address. Every institution she had given herself to had ultimately demonstrated with patience and precision that she was a resource to be used and a liability to be released. She knew this. She had organized her entire life around knowing this. Si-on was a crime lord. His world ran entirely on leverage. She had spent the last 2 weeks handing him every piece of herself she had ever protected, and she did not know, could not know, what a man like him did with that kind of information once the immediate crisis passed. She heard the rooftop door open behind her. She didn't turn. He didn't say anything. He crossed the concrete, sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the pre-dawn cold, and after a brief moment, she felt the weight of his jacket settle over her shoulders.
Then he waited. No explanation, no performance, no careful architecture of words designed to move her toward a conclusion he had already reached. He simply stayed, in the cold and the dark, present and patient, because he had finally completely understood that she had heard enough words in her life to know they cost nothing. What she needed was someone who remained. Eventually she spoke. Her voice was very quiet. "What if you decide I'm not worth the trouble?" His answer came without hesitation, without qualification, without any of the measured control he applied to everything else. "I already decided." A pause, brief and absolute. "The answer doesn't change." The door she had been holding shut for 2 years, the one she had built carefully, maintained diligently, and nearly died defending, opened. She leaned into him and let him in. Choi arrived at the Grand Lantern ceremony at 9 p.m. with 10 men and the particular confidence of someone who has never once considered that the intelligence he received might have been built specifically for him. The pavilion was strung with light. Thousands of lanterns moved on the river below, gold and white against the dark water, and the ceremony's crowd provided exactly the cover Choi had been promised. A distracted venue, a syndicate boss isolated from his usual protection, a wife who had made him sentimental and therefore slow. He had walked into what he believed was an ending. He understood his mistake in the moment his lead man touched his earpiece and went still. The exits were covered. Every position he had assigned his men was already occupied, not by civilians, but by Baek operatives who had been in place for 2 hours, wearing the kind of patience that only comes from following a plan designed by someone who anticipated exactly where he would stand. He turned in a slow circle and found the same thing in every direction, the infrastructure of a trap, assembled around him so cleanly that he hadn't felt a single edge of it. Evelyn had built this room, every wall of it. He turned to find her already between him and Si-on, one step ahead of the movement he hadn't yet made, watching him with the same composed, unhurried certainty she had worn at the gala. He reached for leverage, the instinct of a man who had always won by using what others valued against them. She moved before the thought finished. One motion, clean and irrevocable. His arm locked, his balance gone, the cold surface of the pavilion floor arriving with the finality of a conclusion. She held him there with one hand while the police, who had received 2 years of meticulously documented evidence, closed in from all sides. "You spent 6 months trying to make him see me as his weakness," she said quietly as the handcuffs clicked. "You never once considered what I actually was." She rose. Behind her, prosecutors across the city were opening sealed packages she had prepared 18 months ago, and Choi's organization was beginning, quietly and irrevocably, to come apart. Si-on crossed to her through the lantern light and kissed her in front of every operative, every witness, every remnant of Choi's collapsed network watching from the edges of the pavilion. Not for the optics, not for the message it sent, because he was finished pretending he didn't. The council dissolution took 3 days. The rebuilding took longer, and Si-on approached it the way he approached everything, methodically, without sentiment, with absolute clarity about what the organization needed to become. He removed 4 members, elevated 2, restructured the Eastern Territories around people who had demonstrated, over years of observable behavior, that their loyalty was to the syndicate's integrity rather than its politics. Then he had Evelyn's name added to the charter. He showed it to her on a Tuesday evening, the same quiet hour she had always preferred, the city doing its patient glittering below the windows. He slid the document across the kitchen counter without preface, her name beside his, equal authority, equal standing, the formal architecture of the organization restructured around the reality of what she had already been for 2 years. She read it twice. When she looked up, he was watching her with the particular stillness that she now understood was not distance, but attention. "I married you to give you a name," he said. "I want you to share mine, the real one, not the arrangement." He set the ring beside the document. Deep blue sapphire, gold setting, chosen with the same precision he applied to everything that mattered to him. Not the ring first, but the charter first, because he needed her to understand the distinction between what he was offering and what the original agreement had been.
Protection was a transaction. This was something else entirely.
She said yes before he finished the question. The second ceremony was everything the first had not been. Conducted in English and Korean, full of afternoon light and people who knew them, actually knew them, with Soo-yeon crying openly in the front row and Do-yeon maintaining composure with visible effort in the second. No borrowed names, no sterile office, no signatures exchanged between strangers accounting for the weather. 1 year later, Evelyn stood in the penthouse, their penthouse now, not divided into careful wings but simply inhabited fully by two people who had stopped treating it as neutral ground, and noticed that she had not counted the exits in 6 months. She stood at the window with Seoul spread below her and understood, quietly and completely, what had changed. She had arrived in this city with nothing but survival instinct and a dead operative's muscle memory. Fluent in disappearing, expert in being no one, she had stopped running. She had built something instead. Not because she was no longer dangerous. She was exactly as dangerous as she had always been. She simply no longer had to be alone. That's where Evelyn's story rests. Not at an ending, but at a beginning. And if you felt something watching her find her way home, then you already understand what this space is really for. It's not just stories. It's the feelings we don't always have words for until someone puts them in the right order. Subscribe, like, tell me what this one stirred in you. And stay close, because the next story is already breathing, and it will find the right people at exactly the right time.